All right, hello everybody. This is a video in our propagation station, and today we're going to do a little experiment on propagating cuttings specifically in just a cup of water. Mason jars work too, but today we're just going to be using plastic solo cups. I have some clear ones which I like because I can watch the root development through the cup versus like the standard red solo cup. You can always look inside and be able to see root growth, but with the clear ones I can see it from the side. It's a little bit quicker and I can see all of them kind of as they're lined up next to each other just to evaluate the root growth. But I've chosen several plants that are normally easiest to propagate, just to try and prove how easy they are, but also to increase our chance of success with just rooting in water. Now there's not going to be any rooting hormone, there's nothing fancy. This water is just going to be coming from our sink. If you really want to know, our water comes from a community well, so if you're worried about comparing to your water, that's what we got. But I really don't think it's going to matter a whole lot, especially with these plants that we're going to be attempting to root today. Let's go ahead and go through some of the different plants. I have them all around me right now, and I'll bring them into the camera as we go along. But we've got Cranberry Hibiscus, some Blackberry, some Everglades Tomato, Okinawa Spinach, Longevity Spinach, Katuk, climbing Aster, which is a native wildflower, Turk's Cap Hibiscus, and some Elderberry, another Florida native that has gotten a lot of attention for its use as a medicinal plant. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring each plant in as we go and just kind of show how I trim them back and then cut them into sections on camera. So we'll start with Cranberry Hibiscus. It's the closest one to me. So I got a long trimming of Cranberry Hibiscus. It's January 9th, 2024. And this time of year, Cranberry Hibiscus is usually blooming. So you'll be able to see some of these small flowers that are trying to emerge. We definitely want to cut those off of our cuttings. We don't want any unnecessary energy going to trying to bloom. We want it all to go to rooting. So I like to start at the bottom. My first cut to trim this was right underneath the leaf node, which is important because that's where the roots are most likely to originate from. So I go ahead and make my first cut when I trim this right beneath the leaf node. That way this can be the start of our first cutting. So I like to go ahead and look to see where I'm going to make my next cut. For this one, it's really going to be basically in between here and here. Either one of those is probably going to be fine. For the sake of more cuttings, I'll go ahead and cut this one here. And then this time I'll make that one a little bit longer and cut underneath that one. Notice I'm cutting all these at angles, just like you would cut flowers. This next one I'll go ahead and take here. And this next one will be a little bit longer, I'll cut it there. And we'll take this next one here. Again, every time underneath the leaf node, at an angle. And now we're kind of left with what could potentially be a long cutting, just because as we get to the more, the newer growth and the more tender, less woody plant tissue, these typically have a harder time rooting in most plants. Excuse me. So for here, I'm gonna do kind of something a little non-standard. I'm just gonna go ahead and take that off, and then this will be my last cutting, and that'll be waste. All right, so next I gotta remove all the leaves, except for right around 2 or 3, and also removing any of the buds. So I'll start at the bottom, cutting as close to the stem as possible. It's gonna be hard to cut that, so this one I'll probably just end up getting with my fingers here. All right, so there's a cutting. Go ahead and put it in one of our cups. And we'll grab the next one, do the same thing. Doesn't have to be perfect, especially with cranberry hibiscus. Very resilient plant. And you know what, I'm gonna take this more mature leaf off and leave these younger too. Okay. And the beautiful thing about doing this with cranberry hibiscus is basically everything I'm trimming off right now can go to the kitchen. All these leaves are edible, and they taste like cranberries. Good addition to salads, raw, to bring kind of a unique flavor to your salad. And, they're also pretty good in stir fry. Some people make teas out of them. I haven't done that myself, but I know people who do it. All right, so that one has quite a few new leaves on it, but that's going to be okay. And you know what, just for the sake of showing some differences, we'll do all the leaves on this one. See what happens. All right, only a few more to go. And last one. Again, no leaves, just to have a second one. Let's see what happens. All right, so all this is ready to go inside. I find that the smaller leaves like this are more flavorful, but the larger ones still carry the flavor too. All right, and that's it for cranberry hibiscus. All right, so next we're gonna do Katuk. I don't have a lot of Katuk, which is why this cutting is so small. Where I have my mother plant growing has a lot of shade, so the growth is slow. I really wanted to kind of test the limits and see if it would thrive there. And since then I've been taking cuttings and kind of spreading them around the yard just to see where it likes best here in our Central Florida foodscape. This is a perennial leafy green, and it grows like a bush, and the leaves can be eaten raw, and they kind of have a taste similar to like peas. It's supposed to be pretty nutritious and just another easy to care for perennial edible green that we don't have to continuously plant over and over again. All right, so for this one, it's going to be very similar to the cranberry hibiscus. We're looking for sections, cutting under the leaf node, and then removing all the leaves. I'm going to try and stretch and get 3 out of this. Definitely not as much cuttings as the cranberry hibiscus, but we're working with what we got here. All right, so we'll do there, and then there, and then those will be our 3. And then I'll just go ahead and trim the leaves. And I got this one kind of pitiful looking small one up there. We'll see what happens. And then the same on this cutting here. And I'll probably leave those leaves there. And then I'll just kind of pull off some of these small ones that might be difficult to cut. And then there's our 3 Katuk cuttings. And we'll see how it goes. Put that in our pile to go in the kitchen. All right, next we'll do Everglades tomatoes. There's a lot of people out there that call these native Florida tomatoes. But I'm on the side of that these are not native and that these were naturalized a long time ago. Originally from South America and then brought up here. These set off literally hundreds of cherry-sized tomatoes, and they tolerate Florida heat and sunshine really, really well. And they seem to be more resistant to pests such as armyworms and the like, hornworms, than most other tomatoes. They readily self-seed pretty easily, and I like to feed them to our chickens, and then they then in turn eat them and then poop them out, and then next thing you know, I've got sprouts of Everglades tomatoes all over the yard just from them. So very easy to self-seed, but also they do pretty well doing from cuttings. Haven't quite mastered them yet, but we're gonna see how they do in just water. A lot of times I do them straight into soil with rooting hormone. Sometimes they do all right in the cloner as well. It seems to be hit or miss, but we'll see what happens just going straight into water. So I'll probably leave this one as a whole cutting just to see what happens. Because I can't really divide this into 2 very easily, so we'll go ahead and trim this one, and that one, and that one. And then that, and of course, don't want it to be flowering. And I'm left with this, and I can see that that is going to eventually turn into flowers, and I don't want that, so I'll just hand pull that off. And I'll leave this one like that, see what happens here. All right, this is a more of like a lateral stem off of one of the main stems, so looks like something's been eating on it a little bit. I don't see anything obvious here. Don't see any eggs, so, but I tend to have less success with these than I do more upright stems. Whoops. But we're gonna give it a try in comparison. I'll leave this as a cutting, so I'm just gonna trim everything off. Tomatoes are in the nightshade family, so obviously these are not going to be edible leaves. But their cherry-sized tomatoes are great for adding to salads, or I guess if you had enough of them, you could turn it into salsa or can them. Or for me, I'm not a huge tomato lover, so they become chicken food. And we'll see what happens with this little guy. Don't have a lot of high hopes for you, but I'll give you a shot. All right, this one's pretty sturdy. Let's see, I'll cut this one here, see how that goes. And then I'll just trim that back to about there so we have some decent leaves on it. This one, I'll probably go up to here on you. All right, like I said, it's nothing perfect about it, especially for a little experiment, having some variety, make it a little bit more interesting. All right, let's see what happens with that one. Cut this one under here. A little bit smaller cutting, but should do all right. Go up to here on this cutting. All right, getting down here to the end. I'll cut that one there. Let's see what happens with these new tender leaves coming out of that. And then we'll finish it off with this last piece here. The reason we're removing a bunch of these leaves is just to have less demand for energy, but also still have something left over for photosynthesis. So that's kind of the method or the reasoning why we do it that way. I'll separate those from what's going to the kitchen. All right, what's next? Let's do Okinawa spinach. So this plant right here is another perennial edible leafy green. It's not even a true spinach, but that's the common name. Originally from somewhere in Asia, I can't remember exactly where. The cool thing about this is the purple belly of the leaves. Really makes a cool accent when you're talking about foodscaping. I like to grow this because it brings a lot of color, and these don't really get really tall. They kind of sprawl out, maybe get 3 foot high. In the fall and winter, they'll actually bloom a small orange flower. And so I like to grow them in front of my porch, almost as a low-lying hedge. And I just think that they look really cool with the green color and the purple underbelly. Accents other purples well, and accents yellow really well too, yellows and oranges. So when you're looking at trying to foodscape, like if you have an HOA or you want the yard to look nice instead of your more standard kind of cottage vibe or farm vibe, these do really well to kind of almost look like they're ornamentals, but they're actually edible. So pretty cool plant. They grow super well here in Central Florida. I grow them in full shade, partial shade, even full sun. They don't really seem to care. All right, so we'll go ahead and start here. And again, all these leaves get to go to the kitchen. Cut it there just to try and have 3 cuttings out of this piece. And we'll leave those 2 on and see what happens with them. Another cool thing about Okinawa spinach is the very tips, where this very tender plant tissue is here, actually has the texture of celery, and it can be eaten like that. So sometimes I'll just, if I'm harvesting this for my dinner plate, I'll just go ahead and cut that off right there, and basically from there to there is almost like celery. Again, these can be eaten raw or added to stir fries. This next one, we'll start here. And this leaf looks a little damaged. I'll go ahead and cut. You know what, we'll just cut this whole thing off and see how it does. And then we'll cut this next one here. These are a little bit shorter than I would normally like, but Okinawa spinach is pretty easy. We'll do that one with no leaves too, just because I made a bad cut there in the beginning up top. Okinawa spinach does get a lot of bend to it in a lot of places. So sometimes your cuttings will start off kind of crooked, but it doesn't seem to affect their new growth as a cutting itself. And it looks like I've trimmed this particular piece back before. You can see right here it's split into two. Like other bushes or woodier plants, anytime you trim, a lot of times, I say anytime and then a lot of times, when you trim them, they like to come back in 2s or 3s, which is something you can use to your advantage if you want to make a plant more bushy. Cutting down near the bottom of the plant brings all this new growth in 2s and 3s and will encourage the plant to have a more bushy form. We're going to leave this cutting whole. In fact, I'll probably just go ahead and take that off and then go back to starting from the bottom, moving all these leaves. It's a really windy day today. Not sure if you can hear the wind behind me. It's perfect weather as far as temperature goes to be working outside. And we'll leave that one just like that. All right. Put this in our kitchen pile. And we'll move on to the next plant. All right, let's do longevity spinach next. So this plant is very similar to Okinawa spinach. This one's pretty dirty. This one does not have the purple underside. It does get a little bit of purple in the stem itself. These are a little bit more temperamental in my experience than Okinawa spinach is. A little bit more picky about their location. They would prefer not to be in direct sun, but they also don't do well in full shade like Okinawa spinach does. I think the leaves are a little bit, the texture is a little bit, I guess, crunchier in a way. They're not as soft as the Okinawa spinach is. So some people don't necessarily like them as much in a salad, but they do stir fry really well. Both of these plants are actually also very good to freeze and then add to smoothies for some nutrition. Granted, freezing definitely takes some nutrition out of the leaves. But when you have a couple plants, you'll have more than enough in your harvest. So when you're trying to find things to do with them, that's another alternative use. Now this cutting right here, I have 2 leaves left over, but as you can see, they're really large leaves. Sometimes what I like to do when I'm working with a plant that has really large leaves, I don't want these large leaves to demand too much energy. So what I'll do is I'll actually just cut them in half, and it doesn't seem to affect my results. And so now I'm kind of left with 2 literally smaller leaves and still get the photosynthesis while also encouraging more root growth. And we'll do this next one. We'll do a shorter one to try and get a couple more cuttings out of it. And this time I'll only cut 1 in half and see how that one does. And then we'll just make this terminate into 2 cuttings. And you know what? That has a little baby new growth coming out. So we'll just go ahead and take all these mature leaves off and see how that one does. And then we're left with this last longevity spinach cutting, and we'll just do one leaf on it and we'll leave it large. All right, and that's it for longevity spinach. Put all this in our kitchen pile. All right, so next we'll do climbing aster. This is a Florida native wildflower. It puts off purple aster shaped flowers. They're really gorgeous and they bloom in the fall. So this plant right here is great to bring fall color when everything else is either going to seed or not really doing so well. This is really springing into action. It does really well propagating through cuttings. It also can self-seed itself. It kind of grows like a vine without the, still being woody, and it, obviously isn't going to be wrapping around anything, so you're not going to be able to train it up a trellis or anything like that. But when you intermix it with other bushes or anything else it can kind of prop on, like a tree, this will tend to climb up with it, hence the name climbing aster. I've also heard this called Carolina aster, which would make you think that it wouldn't be native to Florida, but it is, and probably most of the Southeast. You can fact check me on that, I'm not really sure. But another nice thing about this plant is that it can grow in more moist soil. So on a riverbank or a lakefront, as long as it's not being submerged, this plant does pretty decent near water. But it also grows well far away from water. We have it growing in really sandy soil next to one of our crepe myrtles. And I like growing it there because when my crepe myrtle is going dormant this time of year, this is blooming, so that area still has color. I've also got it growing around some native grasses like mully grass and Fakahatchee grass. And in fact, growing it with mully grass is really fun because the mully grass likes to bloom those tiny pink feather-like flowers in the fall, and then once they kind of start dying out, this will spring out its purple asters, and so that area is just continuously full of color. All right, well, that's enough talking about that. We'll go ahead and start cutting this thing down into cuttings. And we'll start by cutting that first section there. Get rid of that dead growth. And cut that one down, and then that one as well. We're left with something like that. And we'll do this next one. We'll go ahead and make it a little bit longer and cut there. And cut that one back to there. And just another reminder, as I'm looking for where I'm going to make my cut, I'm always searching for where I can make a cut under a leaf node. So here I'll choose here. And that just sets me up for the next cuttings. Go ahead and cut this one here. And go ahead and take that one off and just leave that on there. Kind of same thing here. And we'll just leave this last one intact. Ideally, you want your shears to be as clean as possible. Some people even sterilize theirs. I've never gone that far. I still have pretty good success. Just a regular old pair of rusted hand trimmers here. Alright, that's it for Carolina Aster. Throw that in our non-edible pile. And let's move on to our blackberries. This is my favorite blackberry that we have. It's Osage. I'm not really sure if I'm saying that right, but I believe it's Osage blackberries. And these just seem to grow super well here, and they put off a decent amount of fruit. So when I'm choosing to propagate blackberries, I like to choose these. This time of year they can become kind of dormant, but these have carried on obviously with good green growth all the way up until this month, January. We'll see what happens in February. I've already got some new growth coming out of this leaf node here. So I kind of want to make that one near the top of this cutting. So this one's going to be quite long, and I'll cut underneath that leaf node. This is a little bit longer than what I normally like to do, but sometimes you just got to make adjustments based on what you see. This one right here, we might not have that luxury, just so I can turn this into two. So I'll go ahead and cut here. No leaves to trim. And we'll leave this one intact too, so just trim these off. Now obviously you can see that not all cuttings have to have leaves on them. The ones with leaves tend to do a little bit better, but it's not always mandatory. Alright, so what are we going to do with this guy here? This is, I could cut up here and make this a long cutting, or make it a little bit shorter. Let's make it shorter. We'll cut here, and then we'll get rid of some of those leaves. And we'll cut this one here just because that next gap is quite long. We'll leave that big leaf on, see what happens. And we'll go ahead and do this one down here as well. Alright, we'll cut this one here. Big gust of wind behind me. We'll leave another big leaf on, and then we'll cut that one there and turn that into two. One of the reasons I like to start at the bottom when I'm trimming leaves off is I know I need to leave leaves. There you go, little play on words. We'll make this one a bit longer so this one has a leaf. Not very good looking leaves, but still a leaf. But as I was saying, I like to start from the bottom because I like to, if I'm gonna make a mistake on cutting, I'd rather it be at the bottom and then still leave leaves, there it is again, at the top. So the bottom is kind of mindless, and then at the top is where I start paying attention to what I'm actually cutting. And I feel like if I do it the same way every time, I'm less likely to make mistakes. And then we'll take everything off this one just because that top leaf was kind of already facing downward and it wouldn't fit in the cup very well. I have an easier time growing blackberries here than I do blueberries, although I like blueberries more. Blackberries just seem to grow so much easier without any soil amendments, and they're very easy to propagate compared to blueberries, or at least for me. Haven't quite mastered propagating blueberries. And here's our last blackberry cutting. And there we go. And we'll move all these blackberry leaves into our unedible pile. And those will go in our compost so that we're still using them for something. All right, it seems that we're down to our last plant. So last but not least, we've got elderberry. We're gonna have some pretty thick woody stems here that we're gonna experiment with, seeing if they will root. And I'm finding this leaf node right here that I'm cutting underneath to set myself up for the next one. All right, so I've got a node there, a node there, and a node there. Seems like if I cut here, it's gonna be kind of short, so instead I'm gonna have to make it kind of a lengthy one. Oh, ran away from me. All right, so when I get to almost like a Y here, if I can, I try and pick the main, what I expect, or I assume is the main stem here, whereas this is more of an offshoot. You can see that if I cut this off, I'll probably have a more linear, vertical, straight, vertical cutting than if I were to cut this one off and have that one kind of coming off to the side. So I'll just cut that one here, set it off to the side, and I've got some new growth there, so I'm going to leave that at the top. So I'll go to the node above it, and then unfortunately that one would be too short, so that's just going to have to come off, and I'll take this next one here. I probably could have left that tiny little new growth down there near the bottom, but run the risk of it being in the water, and I don't want that to happen. So now we're left with probably having to turn this into two. Would probably have to be some smaller ones, so we'll cut there, and then we get up to the top. Now I have a Y. I don't really have a choice on which one is gonna look better. This one has more leaves, so give me more choices on which ones to trim off. Ooh, that wind is blowing my cups over here. All right, so we'll go ahead and trim that one and that one. And we're just gonna try and get it down to that little bit of new growth there. All right, we'll do it again. This one got some good growth there, so I'll go to the one above it. We have got some growth there. That would be a real long one, but you know what? Let's do it. This is an experiment. Let's just see what happens. Cut all this off here, and we're left with that. All right, this one looks pretty good. We'll cut there and leave that on. Trim off that little bit. And see what happens with that. Do the same thing here, taking advantage of this growth. And again, just cutting where it seems to make sense. Elderberry is another perennial, grows like a small tree. In the spring, it will be filled with very fragrant white flowers. This is going to be a super long one. Just trying to capitalize on that growth there that I accidentally just yanked off, but hopefully more will sprout. Once you recognize elderberry, you will likely begin to notice it growing along roads pretty much everywhere. It does pretty well in the ditches, so it can tolerate being wet. We're gonna cut here. I know it took me a long time to decide that, but I was trying to figure out how to use that, but I'm gonna use this as my top growth instead. And then I think this next one I'm gonna use that, so I'll trim all that off. It's become very popular, especially with COVID, for its uses as a cough syrup. And it's supposed to have a lot of antioxidants in the berries that it sets after it fruits. Berries cannot be eaten raw by us. I know the birds love them. So they end up getting boiled and turned into a syrup. I've also heard of people making wine out of the flowers. I'm not a wine maker, so I've never tried it, but I've heard it tastes really good. The only downside is that by harvesting those flowers, you miss out on the berries that would come after it. All right, I was just making sure I didn't miss any, but I don't, besides this little guy. Well, you know what, just for fun. All right, that's it for the elderberry. So now I have several cups filled with our cuttings. You can see them all over here. And I'm going to fill them up with water to about this line here on the cup. And I don't think you guys necessarily need to see that in the video. It's pretty self-explanatory. And I'll fill them up with water, and then I'm gonna probably just keep them on the porch, avoiding direct sunlight. And I'll keep you guys updated. So I'll do videos intermittently and update you guys on when I've seen root growth and tell you how many weeks it's been, so that when you're trying this on your own, you'll know when to expect to see some rooting going on, if at all. But I expect the majority of these should root pretty easily and simply just in water. All right, thanks for watching, everybody, and make sure that you head over to our website where you can see all of our propagation station videos. This is where we keep our full length videos, where we go into the most detail, and it does require a monthly subscription to the website. It's pretty cheap, but it helps us to be able to keep doing this and making it worth our time and supporting our business, Fruit of Labor Landscaping. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.